Hello, welcome to another edition of I Am Bastani with me, Aaron Bastani, at Aaron Bastani on Twitter, as ever. Thanks so much for watching. Today I want to talk about the EU referendum, Brexit, why I think the left should vote to leave. We did a week of content dedicated to this question on Navarra earlier on in the year. Go check it out. There's an episode of The Fix, there's a radio show, there's text, content. There's a few videos too, one with James Butler, fantastic. Can't recommend it enough. So anyway, a lot of people, since we did all that content, I've made my position known pretty well, that is, I'm for Brexit. A lot of people have come to me and they've said, Aaron, this is ridiculous. You've lost the plot. You're going bananas, mate. Why would we vote to leave the EU? So I'm going to lay it out, I'm going to put it out there, and I'm going to say why the left should vote for Brexit this June. Number one, the EU is totally undemocratic, or as Donald Trump, it's totally undemocratic. But it is totally undemocratic, right? It's very undemocratic. It's the most undemocratic polity in the democratic world, okay? It's very undemocratic. At the heart of that lack of democracy is the European Commission. The European Commission is unelected, it's unaccountable. The most important competencies within the EU, like external trade policy, are with the Commission, right? So there is no democratic accountability in regards to the European Commission, the most powerful part of the kind of EU governance structure. Some people respond to that. They say, well, yeah, okay, the Council of Ministers, the European Commission, they're not democratic, but then there's the European Parliament. And that's kind of like a fail-safe, right? That's a remedy to this lack of democracy. The European Parliament has fewer powers than the Scottish Parliament. It's just a symbol, right? It's just a symbol. It's invested with very, very few powers. It's very unimportant. Sorry, I hate to break it to you, but that's the way the cookie crumbles. In the last couple of years, the EU has moved from undemocratic to, I would say, anti-democratic, right? So we saw that in 2011, 2012, the installation, okay, of centrist technocratic governments, right, with basic tacit EU backing, okay? Tacit EU backing for undemocratic governments. Nobody elected Mario Monti or Luka Papademos in Greece, right? But they were emergency managerial governments installed by effectively, Euro-friendly elites, okay? So that for me meant a transition from to anti-democratic. That was compounded last May. We saw it with the Greek referendum, okay? As I famously put it, the Oxy vote, around the third bailout, okay? There was a referendum called by the Syriza-led coalition in response to that because the Greeks were really being squeezed by the Troika, the ECB, the Euro group, and all the kind of Eurocrats around that. They have the referendum, what happens? The ECB starves the Greek banking system of liquidity, okay? Yanis Varoufakis, on the morning of that vote, in response to those measures, basically trying to scare the living daylights out of the Greek public, called it terrorism, right? And people go, this is hyperbolic. What is a definition of terrorism? Terrorism is you try to implement or define a political program through the dissemination of fear, terror, through a civilian population. I think trying to start a run on banks is precisely that. The ECB are terrorists. Number two, it does and will continue to make the implementation, the delivery of a socialist political program illegal. Why can't we nationalise steel at the moment? Not that there's any political desire to do that, of course, from the government right now, because they're idiots, they're inept, but also they're ideologically opposed to doing what is right in these particular circumstances, which, as I laid out in the last time I was studying, is nationalisation. But there are also certain regulations around this which just don't mean it can happen. Now with TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, it's currently being negotiated, kind of involves the US and the EU, right? Two of the world's biggest markets. This would really be augmented massively, okay? It would mean that if you wanted to renationalise something, okay? So let's say we want to renationalise rail providers in this country, right? Effectively renationalise, the rail system in this country, right? Bring the trains back into national ownership. That would be illegal. It would be a criminal offence, okay? Under TTIP, within kind of, parameters of the EU. Okay, it would be illegal. And so you'd have these massive legal claims being launched, and these would go to courts and you'd have to pay out billions of pounds. Now, okay, billions of pounds to renationalise things, that's politically doable, okay? But Jesus Christ, making deprivatisation, renationalisation illegal is just ridiculous. Number three, trade. Everybody talks about, we've got to be in the EU, trade and investment, jobs and investment, trade and investment, growth, jobs, trade. Okay, the EU, its external trade policy, as I've already said, okay, is decided by the unelected, unaccountable European Commission. So how pernicious is it? Why should you care? Actually, it's really pernicious, right? It's a continuation of colonial practices and policies, yeah? We've had things like the Cotonou Agreement, and now we've got European partnership agreements where basically if countries, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, want access to the European market without any tariffs, right? That means they also have to open up their own domestic markets. A great example of this is Kenya. Last year, Kenya was refusing to sign a European partnership agreement with the EU. One of the big exports for Kenya is flowers, cut stems. So when they chose not to do this, the EU put a gun to their head and they said, well, if you don't sign this agreement, if you don't sign up to free trade protocol and have European companies which have far greater government assistance, have been around for far longer, access to far bigger markets, in other words, they will nail your domestic companies, right? They will nail them, okay? If you don't allow them free access to your market, then we're gonna put tariffs on Kenyan flowers coming into Europe and you won't be competitive and you'll lose money. Sorry, tough luck. That's exactly how the EU wages trade policy, which I think is really war by the means with a lot of really poor countries in the global south, particularly sub-Saharan Africa. Now this has been going on for 50, 60 years. So when people say that the EU is good for trade, it's good for jobs, it's good for whose jobs and whose trade? White trade, European trade, and almost always at the cost of the global south and some of the poorest, most underdeveloped countries in the world. Final point, number 4. People say, well, the EU is wonderful. We get freedom of movement, and I hate nationalism. Well, I hate to tell you people, if you are for Europe, and a Europe with the most militarized borders in the world, and a Europe where thousands of people die crossing the Mediterranean Sea every year, you're going for one nationalism rather than the other. You're going for European nationalism rather than British, French, Spanish, German nationalism. Climate change means that crop yields, is really going to diminish. It's going to fall in Africa massively. Rising populations, declining crop yields, water is increasingly hard to get around Europe's periphery, not just in sub-Saharan Africa, North Africa, also of course in the Middle East. Yemen, first country in the world to run out of water. Huge amounts of migration, by the way, going out from Yemen at the moment. Where do you think these people go? Where do you think these people go? And it's not because Europe's wonderful, it's because Europe literally is offering them somewhere where they can reproduce their lives. Syria is just the beginning of this, right? Syria is just the beginning of this. So right now it seems like a moot question. Oh, well, we've got the most militarized borders in the world, so what? But as this crisis, this security crunch, this resource crunch, climate change, demographic doubling in sub-Saharan Africa, as all this stuff happens in the next couple of decades, this is actually really important. Jeremy Corbyn in 1975 voted to leave the EU. He's been very critical of it since. The left's position really until the mid-1980s was it was a bad thing. Okay? They clung to it after the mid-80s because of the weakness domestically of the left, because the Thatcherite counter-revolution was so strong. Okay, and that makes sense, but you can't do that forever. Okay, and as long as the left outsources these big debates around trade, around industrial policy, around migration, and it looks to the EU as, this is how we defend these gains, that's not good enough, right? Because tens of millions of people here in Britain are being fooled every day of the week by the press. We have to go and make these arguments politically. It's not easy. Right now we're washed up right now, but we've got to go and do it because institutions of capitalism and the state are not a safeguard against racism and xenophobia. I'm sorry. They aren't. It's not good enough. We need to pull our socks up. There's this shibboleth going around that the EU is defined by its member states. It is a supranational organisation, not an intergovernmental one, okay? This is A-level politics, okay? Which is to say its own bureaucracies, including the Commission, primarily the Commission, are independent of member states now, okay? It's got its own rules, yeah? It's got its own basketball court. It's shooting hoops and it can say to nation states, member states, go away, okay? That's where we're at. In terms of changing it, okay, what would you need? You would need a left-wing German government and or a left-wing French or British government. Probably a few other countries as well, right? Now, look at Germany. Okay, the CDU is in charge, the Social Democrats are on 21%, and Alternative für Deutschland is on 16%, okay? Nazis, okay? So that's not happening anytime soon. What we need to change Europe is basically a socialist party in Germany coming to government. Not going to happen. We're not going to reform the EU, so we really shouldn't be pulling the wool over people's eyes saying it can happen. It can't happen. It's not possible. That's what I think. Let me know what you think. Go on the hashtag #IamBastani. Reach out to me at Aaron Bastani or Novara Media at Novara Media. If you have any particular questions, you want to come back to me, go, hey Aaron, you missed this, you've said this, what about this? Please put them in the comments below. Let's try and do another video because this obviously has to be a conversation. A lot of people have a lot to learn about the EU, myself included. Bye.